Welcome, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time we're taking a trip through the early life of Lu Xun, one of China's most influential literary figures.
Definitely a fascinating one. We're going to be exploring his childhood and early influences through his collection of autobiographical essays, Blossoms Plucked at Dusk.
Oh, I've heard of that book.
Yeah,
It's filled with vivid memories and reflections on Chinese culture, right?
absolutely. You'll be experiencing early 20th century China through his very personal lens, not just dry facts, but folklore too. And relationships with key figures like his nursemaid Ah Chang and his uncle Yu Tian.
Ooh, that's interesting. They sound like compelling figures.
They are, and their relationships with Lu Xun can reveal a lot about the social dynamics of the time period, like, for example, the role of a nursemaid in a wealthy Chinese family.
Okay, so let's start with Ah Chang. She's mentioned quite a bit in the outline. What kind of presence did she have in Lu Xun's childhood?
She was a constant presence. I mean, she was the family's nursemaid responsible for his care, but their relationship, it was complex.
Yeah, I was getting that sense from the way he describes her. It's a mix of admiration and annoyance, wouldn't you say? He even describes her appearance in a way that might seem a bit blunt to modern readers.
Right. But it's important to remember the different social context. Back then, descriptions focused on physical characteristics were more common. It wasn't necessarily intended to be insulting. It was just Lu Xun painting a picture for us.
So we should think of it more as just giving us a fuller picture of her. Okay, that makes sense. So what else can you tell us about Ah Chang and her relationship with Lu Xun? He seemed to find some of her more traditional beliefs a bit frustrating.
Yeah, you're picking up on something important there. There was a tension between them. Ah Chang represents the older generation clinging to those long-held beliefs and superstitions.
Oh, Lu Xun, even as a child, he had that independent mind.
Exactly. And he was always questioning those customs, seeking more rational explanations for things.
He was a curious kid, that's for sure. But his view of Ah Chang takes a dramatic turn when she gets him a copy of the Shanhai Jing, or Classic of Mountains and Seas.
Oh, that's a great point to bring up. It was a turning point.
Why was this book so special? And why did that specific action change their relationship so much?
Well, for one, imagine being a kid who loves books and receiving a treasure trove of mythical stories. Especially back then, access to books, illustrated ones even more so, it was a real privilege.
Right, it shows Ah Chang really cared for him, even though they butted heads a lot.
Exactly. It shows she paid attention to his interests and wanted to encourage them. Plus, it really highlights the power of literature to bridge those generational gaps and really spark the imagination. It's really a wonderful moment in the book.
It is. And the book itself, Lu Xun, describes it as being filled with these bizarre creatures, landscapes, gods, and heroes, and all brought to life through these almost stick figure illustrations. It sounds amazing.
It is, and important too. The Shanhai Jing is considered a foundational text in Chinese mythology. I mean, its influence on Chinese literature and art can't be overstated. Think of it as, well, it laid the groundwork for centuries of fantastical storytelling in China.
Wow, so this one book given to him by, well, a woman he often found frustrating, had a huge impact on his life and creative journey.
Right. It really makes you think about the impact seemingly small gestures can have. And it adds yet another layer to that complex relationship between Lu Xun and Ah Chang. Because despite their differences, she played a key role in nurturing his intellectual curiosity. And ultimately, she contributed to his development as a writer.
Maybe you wonder what we might learn about their relationship if we had access to Ah Chang's perspective. Her own stories, her own experiences. History is so often told from one point of view.
Oh, absolutely. It's always important to consider the unseen, unheard voices that really contribute to the bigger narrative. I mean, even though Ah Chang doesn't have her own voice in Liu Yun's writing, she emerges as a very complex figure. She's a symbol of that old world, but instrumental in shaping the new one.
So we had this very interesting dynamic between tradition and a questioning spirit. Speaking of questioning, the next thing in our outline deals with Liu Yun's childhood encounter with the 24 examples of filial piety, a cornerstone of Confucian values. I'm already sensing some tension brewing.
Oh yeah, that's where we really start to see Lu Xun's critical thinking coming out in full force. Because while the 24 examples was designed to promote the virtues of filial piety, young Lu Xun, he found some of the stories, well, deeply disturbing to say the least.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he was never one to just blindly accept tradition, even at a young age. He mentions two stories in particular, the tales of Lao Lai entertaining his parents and Guoju burying his son. I can see why they would bother a child. Those stories, while meant to teach respect and care for elders, kind of had the opposite effect on him.
Well, because you have to remember, these tales emphasized absolute obedience and sacrifice, which, to a child's mind, could be interpreted as nonsensical or even cruel. Lu Xun's discomfort reveals his sense of empathy, his willingness to question what he was being taught.
It's like he was saying, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. Like with Lao Lai, the man who dressed up as a child to amuse his elderly parents, Lu Xun just found it ridiculous.
Yeah, he even called it an insult to children.
It's almost like he's highlighting this tension between a child's natural playfulness and the rigid expectations of society, right?
Exactly. Plus, it could be seen as a critique of the performance of filial piety. Like, is it truly genuine if it requires such elaborate acts?
And then there's that story of Guozhu, who decides to bury his son alive to make sure there's enough food for his aging mother. Talk about a moral dilemma.
Right. I can't even imagine reading that as a child and not being horrified.
And that's the thing. It highlights these extremes of filial piety promoted in those 24 examples. And even though it has a happy ending, the underlying message of sacrificing a child is unsettling.
Oh, for sure. Because even though in the story, Guozhu ends up finding a pot of gold while digging the grave, but still the idea is there.
It's scary. Lu Xun even mentions being terrified that his own father might try to do the same thing. It's a dark but telling insight into how much anxiety these stories could provoke.
It also reflects the reality of the time. Poverty was a huge concern for a lot of people, and the pressure to provide for families, sometimes at a child's expense, that was a reality for many.
Wow, that makes me think about the power of stories and how they can affect a child's understanding of the world. Lu Xun's critique of these 24 examples is an important reminder that we should always think critically, even about deeply ingrained traditions.
And it's also important to remember that Lu Xun's views on filial piety actually evolved over time. I mean, he questioned the blind acceptance of these traditional tales, but he still recognized the importance of family bonds and respect for elders. His point wasn't to completely reject the idea, but to encourage a more thoughtful approach, a more humane one, too.
It reminds us that his work is full of nuance. Okay, so we've seen how Lu Xun's early life was shaped by these tensions, tradition versus questioning, a complex relationship with Ah Chang, and a growing awareness of how stories, well, how powerful they can be, but also their limitations. Where do we go next in our exploration of his childhood?
Next, we're going to delve into another fascinating aspect, Lu Xun's love of Chinese folklore, specifically his fascination with the Wu Chang. He's a deity associated with death.
Ooh, the Wu Chang, the death messenger. That sounds intriguing. I'm ready.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Lu Xun.
We're picking up where we left off exploring his childhood. We talked about Ah Chang, his nursemaid, and his thoughts on those traditional tales of filial piety.
And don't forget those amazing mythical creatures from the Shanhai Jing. But today we're moving on to something a bit different.
Right, we're diving into Lu Xun's fascination with the Wu Chang,
Right.
a deity associated with death in Chinese folklore. It's pretty interesting how different cultures personify death,
Well, absolutely. And the Wu Chang, he's a unique figure in Chinese folklore. I mean, you might expect a fearsome Grim Reaper type, right?
Yeah, kind of like the Western idea of the Grim Reaper.
Exactly. But the Wu Chang is more of a bureaucratic figure. Imagine a tall, imposing guy, long black beard, a menacing scowl, and dressed in the official robes of a magistrate.
Ooh, okay, so not exactly a friendly neighborhood spirit.
Mm-mm.
What's this bureaucratic aspect all about? Like, what does he actually do?
Well, he's responsible for escorting souls to the afterlife. He's the one who makes sure everything runs smoothly in the underworld.
So like a civil servant of the afterlife.
Aha, exactly. Bound by rules and regulations, managing paperwork, navigating all the complexities of the underworld.
That actually sounds like it could appeal to Lu Xun and his questioning nature.
Oh, absolutely. Because Lu Xun, he wasn't a fan of blind faith. He was drawn to contradictions, complexities. And the Wu Chang, he embodies both.
So despite his intimidating appearance, he's not purely evil.
Not at all. He represents order, justice, even the inevitability of fate. There's this balance there.
Fearsome but relatable.
Exactly. It's a fascinating paradox.
So how did Lu Xun even encounter the Wu Chang? Was it stories? Or did he see this figure during those local festivals he wrote about?
A bit of both. Lu Xun talks about witnessing the Wu Chang during festivals and theatrical performances. Imagine these elaborate costumes, dramatic makeup, powerful singing and movement. It was a spectacle.
Oh wow, I bet it was. He also mentions this opera, Mu Lian rescues his mother. What role does the Wu Chang play in that story?
Well, in that opera, Mu Lian's mother, she's been condemned to the underworld for her sins. So Mu Lian, he goes on this dangerous journey to rescue her, and he encounters the Wu Chang along the way. It's a story about filial piety, of course, but it's also about confronting death and the afterlife, and dealing with those powers.
So the Wu Chang is more than just a background character then. It's like he represents something deeper about how the Chinese understood death and the afterlife.
Right. He's not just a grim reaper collecting souls. He embodies the anxieties people had, but also their hopes about the unknown. He reminds us that we're mortal, but also acts as a symbol of accountability. Even the powerful have to face judgment in the afterlife.
That's so interesting. A figure of fear, but also a source of comfort.
That duality, that's key to understanding why the Wu Chang is so compelling. He reflects questions we all have, like our fear of what happens after death, our desire for meaning, and our need for some kind of order in the face of all that.
Makes sense. But Lu Xun wasn't just passively watching these depictions, right? He seemed very interested in the details.
Oh yeah, he talks about paying attention to the Wu Chang's appearance, mannerisms, even his dialogue. Lu Xun was a very keen observer. He used those observations to explore big themes in his writing. Remember, he was a master of detail. He saw those details as a way to understand culture and society, even the human condition.
Like an anthropologist, studying rituals to understand a society's beliefs. What we find funny or scary or even entertaining, it reveals a lot about our worldviews.
Right. The Wu Chang, he's this rich source of cultural meaning. He doesn't just represent death, but justice and order. And Lu Xun was fascinated by those layers. He used them to look at even bigger questions about life and death, tradition, and authority in his writing.
It really is amazing how these seemingly simple stories and traditions can provide so much insight. So we have the Wu Chang, this complex piece, who embodies death and judgment. But Lu Xun also observes some lighter portrayals of him during festivals, right?
Oh yeah. He talks about the tradition of sending off the Wu Chang. It's a ritual done after someone dies to appease the deity. Lu Xun describes a scene where the Wu Chang is accompanied by this character carrying a tray of food. But he's forbidden from eating any of it.
Haha, what? That's like playing a prank on the god of death. Why that playful interaction? What's the point?
It's a way of acknowledging his power, you know?
Yeah.
But also asserting some sense of control. We might fear death, but we can still laugh at it a bit. It speaks to our resilience as humans.
Like humor as a coping mechanism, a way to deal with tough emotions and find a bit of light when facing the unknown.
Exactly. And Lu Xun takes it even further. He talks about the Wu Chang's family life, which adds another layer to this already complex figure.
Hold on, the god of death has a family.
He does, at least according to some folklore. Lu Xun mentions that during these festival processions, the Wu Chang is often accompanied by two other characters. A woman, she's referred to as Wu Chang's wife, and a young boy called A Ling.
Oh, wow, so he's a family man. That's so interesting. It's like Chinese folklore is humanizing even the most otherworldly beings. Makes you wonder if they have family dinners in the underworld and bicker about chores.
I love that. But it does show how those lines between the divine and human get blurred in Chinese folklore. Even the god of death's part of this social fabric connected through family.
And that humanizing aspect comes up again when Lu Xun mentions a man who lived near his family. The man claimed to be a walking Wu Chang, right?
Yes, he believed that he went to the underworld in his dreams to perform tasks for the Wu Chang.
So another example of that blurring between the living and the dead, the Wu Chang isn't some distant deity. He's interacting with the living world.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Lu Xun takes these bits of folklore stories, rituals, local beliefs, and weaves them together. He creates this rich tapestry that tells us so much about Chinese culture and their anxieties about death, and just the whole human relationship with death, too.
He's such a master at finding profound meaning in everyday things. He helps us see the familiar in a whole new light, all those hidden depths beneath these traditions and beliefs.
Exactly.
Makes me want to learn more about Chinese folklore. It feels like there's so much we can learn from how those stories reflect our shared human experience.
Absolutely. And Lu Xun is the perfect guide. I mean, Blossoms Plucked at Dusk, it's such a great place to start. You get a taste of his storytelling and his social commentary all in one.
Definitely adding it to my reading list. Well, this has been quite a journey so far. We walked through a childhood garden, met mythical creatures, faced moral dilemmas, and even went to the underworld, all through the lens of the Wu Chang. I'm excited to see what comes next in our deep dive.
Next up, we're shifting gears a bit. We're going to explore Lu Xun's experiences with education. We'll be entering the 100 Grass Garden and the 3 Flavors Study Hall. Those were two very contrasting worlds that really shaped how he viewed learning and creativity.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered so much ground already. Chang, the Wu Chang, filial piety, and those amazing mythical creatures.
It's been quite the journey. But we're moving on to a new chapter in Lu Xun's life now, his education.
Yeah, our outline mentions these two really interesting sounding places, the 100-Grass Garden and the Three Flavors Study Hall.
That contrast is so important for understanding how Lu Xun viewed learning and creativity. You see, the 100-Grass Garden, it was his paradise, this place of endless exploration and wonder. Just imagine lush vegetable patches, a smooth stone well. He talks about a towering honey locust tree and mulberry trees full of ripe fruit.
We had a dream playground for a kid. What kind of adventures did Lu Xun have there? I'm picturing a curious kid just completely absorbed by the natural world.
You're right on the mark. He paints such vivid pictures of his explorations. He'd listen to the crickets and cicadas, chase bumblebees, and watch skylarks soar through the sky. He even talks about finding centipedes under broken bricks and playing with these blister beetles that puffed out smoke.
It sounds like a childhood straight out of a nature documentary. He was such a keen observer, taking it all in. I bet those experiences really shaped his imagination and creativity.
Oh, absolutely. You can really sense this feeling of freedom and joy in those descriptions. But then, there's this stark contrast with the Three Flavors Study Hall. That was the traditional classroom where he received his formal education.
Three Flavors? That's a strange name for a school. What's that all about?
Well, it refers to the three main principles of Confucian education: literature, history, and philosophy.
So a well-rounded education then.
You'd think so, right. But Lu Xun's experience there wasn't quite as, stimulating as the name suggests.
So not exactly living up to its name then.
Sadly, no. Because Lu Xun describes it as a place where curiosity was often stifled. Instead of, encouraging kids to ask questions and think critically, the focus was on rote memorization, mastering calligraphy, following strict rules.
I can't see young Lu Xun being very happy in that kind of rigid environment. It's like taking a bird that's used to flying free and caging it.
Perfect analogy. You can almost feel his frustration in his writing. He talks about being forced to memorize passages from this text called Gleanings of Ancient History, which he found totally incomprehensible. And his teacher even warned him, recite it from memory. If you can't, you're not allowed to go to the festival.
Oh, wow. Tough crowd. That's harsh. To deny a kid a chance to go to a festival just because they haven't memorized some boring old text seems a bit extreme.
It really shows the authoritarian nature of education at the time. Obedience and conformity were valued over, everything else. And that kind of rigid learning environment, it's exactly what Lu Xun rebelled against, both personally and in his writing.
Makes you wonder how many other curious minds were shut down by that kind of system. It's a reminder that education should nurture curiosity, foster creativity, empower kids to question the world around them.
Exactly. And Lu Xun's experience in the Three Flavors Study Hall definitely had a lasting effect on him. It really influenced his views on education and his later work on educational reform. He thought learning should be engaging, relevant to people's lives, and open to everyone, not just a select few.
And that's a message that's still relevant today.
Definitely. His story reminds us that education isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about cultivating a love of learning, about nurturing those sparks of curiosity and imagination that we see in his exploration of the 100-Grass Garden.
It's really amazing how those two contrasting experiences, the freedom of the garden versus those rigid rules of the classroom, they kind of foreshadow his life's work, his passion for challenging norms, and really advocating for individual expression.
It's as if those early years were the foundation, the seeds of his social commentary and his belief in individual thought.
Well, I think it's safe to say this deep dive has been a success. We've explored so much. A childhood garden full of wonder, those mythical creatures, questions of morality, even a trip to the underworld with the Wu Chang.
I've really enjoyed guiding you through it all.
We got to see Lu Xun not just as a literary giant, but as a human being, shaped by all these experiences.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover in his writing. Don't stop here. Explore more of his work. Keep questioning, challenging assumptions, and embrace that power of critical thinking.
And as always, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you in our deep dive today? What new perspectives did you gain? Keep the conversation going. And until next time, happy exploring.